We have a really great panel today, and unfortunately, you only have 30 minutes to hear from them. But we're talking about entrepreneurship in the public sector. And it's really kind of a great opportunity to have this discussion, especially here in Denmark, which started the world's first innovation lab in government. And also, one of our panelists is from Estonia, which you might know has such an extensive e-governance and digital governance sector. So please, my panel, if you could come up here. Thank you. And first, I would like you each to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about where you're from and why you're here.
I can kick off. My name is Morten. I come from Leo Innovation Lab. It's an innovation lab established by Leo Pharma, which is the oldest pharma company in Denmark. We deal with dermatology, skin conditions, and the innovation lab was established 3 years ago to, as it's popularly phrased, move beyond the pill, so to establish digital solutions for improving the lives of people with skin conditions. Like the majority of the 100 people we are in the innovation lab, I don't come from pharma. I come from having worked in the digital industry, in media and content for the past 15 years. I guess that's the short version.
Great.
Hello, I'm Kåre Nielsen. I'm coming from the Danish government's disruptive Taskforce, which is a new establishment trying to help the Ministry of Business navigate better between new technology, digitization, and smart regulation. So we are very much still in the beginning of it. Before that, I was at Uber and at Novozymes, and also in the public sector.
My name is Taimar Peterkop. I'm the one from Estonia. As you know, Estonia is one of the leading nations when it comes to digitalizing public services. There are only 3 times in Estonia when you need to see a civil servant. Everything else you can do digitally. When you get married, when you get divorced, and when you buy real estate. Because then you really need to establish intent, and you have to be physically present. Everything else you can do digitally in Estonia. And I run a government agency that is responsible for the core e-government systems like electronic identity, data exchange layer, all the different databases are connected together. We are an ISP for government agencies and also a central agency for the cybersecurity. So in my agency, both the innovation and then what strangles the innovation, security, are combined together. This allows us to produce what we call security by design solutions for our e-government. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you. And please note, we have Slido for this session. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please submit them during the course, and I'll take them for you. But just to kick things off, when we think about corporates and we think about public institutions, we're thinking about big, long-standing types of institutions and practices. So how does it work in your terms of how do you think entrepreneurially in your roles?
Well, first of all, we've taken this step to physically distance ourselves from the mothership, so allowing us to build our own culture. We usually talk about corporate governance as the immune system that's built to strike down on any bacteria that doesn't fit, and that is designed to also strike down on innovation, because by definition, innovation is something new. So corporate governance will strike down on it, so it has to sit separately to thrive. And also on a more concrete level in terms of getting talent on board and nurturing the entrepreneurial spirit, we can see that building a separate culture has been necessary. We've got a completely different type of people recruited. We recruit people in categories that are in very, very high demand, so we have to cater to their needs in a very different way to what a pharma company does. And I think our average age is probably 15 or 20 years younger than the pharma company. So we've distanced it, and created a separate location as a way of creating our own culture.
Great.
Yeah, we are in the Ministry of Business. We are this new kid on the block, and first of all, the public sector is quite risk averse. and that doesn't fit very well with technology development and digitization. So what we are trying to feed into that system is to try to work in isolated ways, more experimental, more agile, and we have to do that by doing small, concrete learning projects. And I think that's the key thing. When you're called something as flashy and bossy as the Disruption Task Force, you can only disappoint. That's lesson number 1. 2, you need to be very tangible and operational. 3, you need to understand the one you need to disrupt. In this case, it's the public sector. So what we're trying is to zero in to see what we can do, and trying to insert a bit of risk orientation, because that is much needed if you wanted to navigate in the new landscape.
It's traditionally in public sector, you're implementing the laws. You're only allowed to do what's written in regulations. But now with the digitalization, you have to break the laws, and I agree with the you have to build risk appetite into the leadership in public sector, so they are willing to understand how technology allows you to change the regulations and the processes in public sector. This is what Estonia has been good at. Innovation in public sector is not about technology, it's about changing the bureaucracy, changing the laws. And this is what most of the countries are struggling with. Technical part is usually easy.
So when we think about disrupting things like big pharma or government institutions, we could probably identify a number of different things, maybe even too many things that might be ripe for disruption. How do you strategize and decide a course of action when it comes to changing thinking in these institutions?
We are not about to disrupt any kind of sector at all. What we're trying is also to be more on the front foot when new business models are arriving and new technology. With the speed of new technology and basically a legislative process that hasn't changed for the past 150 years, what do you do in that space? How do you accommodate the new speed? How do you accommodate to be agile and flexibility? On the other hand, to insert that when you pass a law, it has to be robust. And I tell you, it's not an easy task, but I think there was a lesson learned with Uber that even among the unions, they were saying that Denmark cannot afford to miss the new Uber. And then 1 year after, Denmark was the kind of front runner in making a deal with Airbnb to do automatic tax collection, just to highlight that, yeah, there's stuff you can do in that area. But I think that's what we are trying to figure out with our good colleagues within the ministry, to take the small steps, leading by example, because this ministry, they are not geared for revolution, so we need to start in one corner and taking it by the example in order to scale if you want to do something differently. So it's very much example, taking it being very, very concrete, and then trying to argue for why should you take that at a further scale before you're also knocking on the door of the next ministry next door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can totally recognize that from the Innovation Lab, because it doesn't quite make sense to try and strategize into something that's the unknown, because you don't know what you're planning for. So I think our experience in the 3 years we've existed has been go ahead and do something and then learn as you go along. Mm-hmm. And this is not just about being unafraid of failure, it's also acknowledging the fact that we're trying to enter into something that we don't know what is. And we're not going to know. It's like looking at a summit, but there's a layer of clouds to hide the way to the summit, and we need to start walking to identify a road, and even if that's the right summit we're looking for. So I think it's less about thinking and, that came out wrong, we're not thinking at all. But it's less about trying to analyze based on your current knowledge of the world, and more about creating the process and the framework to venture into the world. Mm. So it's a lot about actually doing it and then finding out, oh, that didn't work, but maybe we can do this instead. And then from that, you gradually get an understanding. So it's much more procedures and methodology than it is actual strategy, I'd say. Mm-hmm. Strategy comes along, but enabled by that.
Mm-hmm. I think you need a culture for that. It's that both the politicians, the civil servants, and then private companies helping them all are moving in the same direction. That it's as you said, the goal is not clear all the time, but you need a culture that we want to change. We want to use this technology. We want to explore. Governments are not good in that exploring and doing innovation, but you need to change that culture. Apparently in Denmark, it was even in Estonian news that the French president said that Danes are very good in innovation compared to the French, that they don't have this culture of innovating and trying new things. They want to keep things how they are. It's very important to have this culture to explore and try new things and not to be afraid to fail.
Yeah. And I think also it's about being able to deal with uncertainty, which I think is scary for anyone, and I think particularly for governments, because how are you going to plan for it, and how are you going to get someone to decide whether or not your approach to running the country is right if it's based on uncertainty? And that's a really scary prospect. But I think it's at the core of it is understanding that we don't know what we're venturing into, and that's why we need to progress.
And that really illustrates one of the strong tensions between entrepreneurship and the public sector, is that the public sector is there to create this rigidity and to create some of the bounds in which innovation can happen and to take away uncertainty. So when we think about trying to enable this culture that allows innovation to happen, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your experience that might be helpful for different types of institutions that would like to create more opportunities for entrepreneurship?
I would say from our point of view, create the framework and then allow the innovation to happen autonomously. Mm-hmm. So you bring in the people that you think have the right mindset and the right ability to challenge the current situation, maybe even a naive approach to it, because they're not hindered or slowed down by legacy knowledge, and then create the framework for them to do whatever they do. I think that's probably what I would imagine could help in the public sector as well. Create the platform, the plugins, and then allow stuff to happen instead of trying to be necessarily the driver, because that's not necessarily the cultural fit.
I agree. I think we're just 4 months down the road, so it's a bit premature, but I think one of the lessons learned also for me coming in there is that we also need to nurture a kind of culture where all the good civil servants, they are participating in the ecosystems. I mean, they don't have the full knowledge, particularly on the technology front. So taking part in incubators, ecosystems where you sit down with entrepreneurs, business scientists, in order to understand and feed in the knowledge from the regulating perspective as early as possible, and also just to get the practice and orientation on what's actually going on out there. I think that's pretty fundamental if you want to stay on top of that.
Great, and I want to take a few questions from the audience. And Kåre and Morten, your institutions operate a little bit, are connected to government and also to the corporate, but are outside of it in some ways. There's some distance there. Where Taimar, you operate within the more formalized government structure. What are some of the benefits and some of the challenges for each of these different types of innovation models?
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits, as I said in the beginning, was it allowed us to create our own culture and be an attractive place to work for a completely new type of talent that pharma don't have access to normally. And that was important in the beginning to build sort of a rigidity and a perseverance in dealing with the mothership. But what we also saw was in the beginning, the first 2 years, we found out that if we went too far away, we lost what we call our unfair advantage. So what the access to all the knowledge, all the pharma knowledge, all the reach to doctors around the world, all the understanding of processes that the startup around the corner will not have. And so that's brought us closer to the organization, actually. At the same time, matured us to a point where we had more to offer and could, as a more equal partner, participate in collaborations. But we found clearly that we need to have a certain closeness to that whole industry knowledge to really leverage an unfair advantage to where we have a higher likelihood of succeeding.
For us, I think the main challenge is not to look like an average government agency. We work very hard to have flexibility, to have autonomy, and people would feel like they're not civil servants, but they are part of the IT community. But the value of being a government agency is that we do have not only the carrot, but the stick as well. We can make other government agencies act in a certain way to use certain solutions. We are responsible for interoperability of our e-government, so we can enforce certain rules. So that's probably a good thing sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes.
Well, we certainly don't want to be autonomous at the task force. We want to be an integrated part of the government, because the only way you can disrupt and insert learnings there is if you're being perceived as a colleague who understands what the heck is going on within the organization. So one of the key challenges for my new colleagues on board is to also pursue a program where we follow actual legislation so we better understand and so we can convince our good colleagues that we are there for them and we are not some kind of a holy grail or some fancy new disruption guys who can invent funny stuff. But we need to go down to the machine room to deliver the tools and understand. And of course, we need to do that also from an outside-in perspective, but we certainly need to be an integral part. We certainly need to be seen as good colleagues who are part of that. So we are not outside the mothership, we are very much in the mothership.
Great. And let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you face in developing this organization. So what are some of the barriers that you faced in kind of navigating this relationship, and how have you overcome them?
I think one thing is when you're, again, if I revert to the fact that we are called Disruption Task Force, I mean, next time somebody wants to do the same, don't call it Disruption Task Force, give it some more kind of, low-key name. That's the first starting point. And I think then it's also to figure out where you can actually do a difference. We are just a small unit within a big machine of 3,000 people. So what we are focused on is where we can add some value in the organization, where we can add the difference. But it starts all with trying to understand what is actually going on inside the machine. And I think that's the right way to do it. And then we just need to prioritize and be very concrete. And then where the challenge is that everybody is so busy on doing their stuff. So our perspective is more looking, from a 5 to 10 years perspective on what could be going on. So to create the space with our good colleagues to try to see that you can actually do things in a different way is a bit of a tough issue, because they are only being measured what they are doing tomorrow. So this tomorrow with the day after tomorrow perspective is where you certainly have a clash. Also because the organization is very geared towards delivering and execution and following the political logic. And the political logic is somewhat bizarre. Yeah.
I think one of the challenges we face is that the traditional way how governments are run is that, at least in Estonia, it's that the ministry is doing the policy and then an agency executes that policy. In IT, in digitalization, it doesn't work like that. Most of the competences are with us, so the policies that are done in a strategic level are often irrelevant. So we set our own goals, and this is not good when an implementation agency sets our own goals, because they tend to be modest. So this is probably a challenge that there is no good cure for, is how you can overcome this. One of the many, many challenges.
Right, and I think that's kind of speaks to one of these questions here is from Anonymous. So how should the government, what role should they play in taking ownership when it comes to innovation? So how should they think about developing opportunities for innovation, and how can we encourage greater conversation happening?
So if we, just to give since Estonia already has some historical perspective, we've been building this digital society of ours for 20 years. I think the Estonian model, the success of Estonian model is based on the good cooperation with private sector. The government wasn't the good buyer or procurer. It was the private sector who often came up with good ideas and said that, but maybe we're going to do things this way. And the government went along. So you need to have the good cooperation with private sector, both to develop the solutions and then to if possible, to use the solutions as well, that they are used both by the government agencies and private sector. So all this good cooperation with the community, with the ecosystem.
I think the most important role is to create the right foundation and circumstances for innovation. As I mentioned previously, innovation is very much a process and allowing for the right circumstances. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the government institution who drives the process, as long as they facilitate the building blocks. So in the healthcare space, in Denmark, we've got a world-class number of healthcare data on patients. The social security system is very unique. So we've got a lot of data, but it's completely unstructured. There's like 160 different registers around this small country. But if there was an access to do testing and prototyping, obviously taking into consideration data security and all that goes without saying. But it would allow Danish companies to really get proof of concept in a very small market. It would allow international companies to come to Denmark, get proof of concept in a small country, and then take it international. And I often compare it to how it was in the 10, 15 years ago with high penetration of broadband technology. I don't know whether that was because of an intention of doing innovation or driving regular business or just for the consumers. But the fact was, we were very, very advanced in the Scandinavian countries in terms of penetration of phones and broadband, which now I think is the reason why we've got in the mobile games sector, we've got a very, very significant world role. We've got the leading platform in developing mobile games for Unity. We've got some of the most downloaded mobile games comes out of Danish developers. And that, I think, is because the right circumstances were there. So that's, I really think, is the most important factor.
Right, and some of the government policies help structure the opportunities for those sorts of outcomes. So thinking about some of the human side and those personal data points that you were mentioning, and kind of responding to this question of what is the role of the citizenry, or the clients really, of the government and to these companies when you're considering developing innovation in your organizations? What does the human role look like, and how do you respond to them?
To citizens? I mean, you do that every 4 years, the election in a representative democracy. I think proximity to consumers, to citizens, to companies, to entrepreneurs is key. And it's to insert a culture where you're close to them as one entry point. I mean, Denmark is already a global digital frontrunner, always clearly being number 1 and 2 and 3, but that doesn't mean we are there tomorrow. And I think in a Danish context, what we need to look into is more how we can get the smaller and medium-sized companies on board of this digital journey. That's really a key challenge. And I think it's again this kind of taking part of the ecosystem, being out there, and don't think that you can drive everything from government. We cannot pick winners. We can pick maybe the framework conditions, but that's the way it should be.
I'd say one of the very, very great advantages that the digital ecosystem has is that it's super, super competitive. You can get global solutions that will compete for access to the consumers. And then you find out by what the consumer actually does who wins the battle, where the political system has the problem of trying to get people to answer hypothetical questions, which no one is very good at, ever. But that's what you plan on, saying, we want to do this, is that a good idea? I think it is. Like if you ask me when at some point in time my car can fly, should it also brew coffee? I don't know. But competition in the digital space means that there's a natural gravity towards what actually works. And I think if it was possible to replicate that, to say, we can't decide from the get-go what works. We're going to have to let people as citizens actually decide. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if we can do sundhed.dk in that way, or even this semi-public like Reisekortet. But I think that's what has driven digital innovation so far, is that it's actually, let's see what works.
But at the same time, we need to educate people. It's our entire population is not digitally literate, so we need to educate some parts of it. We need to make people understand of how technology works. Estonia has a lot of misconceptions. In Estonia, people have a lot of misconceptions that the technology is safe. It works 100% all the time. So you have to educate people that no, it's not the case, that it doesn't solve all your problems. It's not entirely safe. That in order to have trust that people would use the digital services, you need to constantly educate people as well. So you cannot let the population decide all the time. You have to lead the nation as well, or population.
And I think, we're also seeing right now, you could call it tech glass, that after 10, 15 years where everybody is just hailing tech as the new god, as the fast track to competitiveness and everything beautiful, we are trying to look into the other side about the dark issues of privacy, data ethics, taxation, etc. And I think there's a huge space for Danish government, for the European government to go into that, to address that issue. Because if you go up the helicopter or the satellite in China, if you're a bit rough, regulation is for the party. And in the US, regulation is for big tech. And then in Europe, we've tried to start with GDPR. It's a bit cumbersome, but again, it's a way to insert the consumer and the citizen in the equation to ensure that they're part of that, and that we are gaining also as a society. And I think there's a competitive space in there if we look at tech from this kind of a citizen/consumer perspective.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great point to end on. So thank you again.